I remember the sterile scent of the operating room, the hum of the machines, the quiet focus that was my sanctuary. For years, that was where I felt most in control, most effective. Dr. Daniel Evans, pediatric surgeon, fixing broken hearts and mending tiny lives. But outside the hospital, my own heart was breaking. My wife, Sarah, and I, we had spent a decade chasing a dream. The kind of dream that becomes an ache, a phantom limb. Years of IVF, cycle after grueling cycle, each failure a fresh gouge in our souls. The hope would surge with every positive pregnancy test, only to crash down, leaving us breathless and hollow. The decision for surrogacy wasn't an easy one. It felt like admitting defeat, a concession to a reality we never wanted. But it was also a new beginning, a sliver of light in what had become an oppressive darkness. We interviewed countless women, reading profiles, listening to their stories. And then there was Chloe. She was 22, from Bakersfield, her eyes holding a haunted weariness that belied her youth. Her background was riddled with the kind of struggles I only saw glimpses of in my patients' families: poverty, instability, a lack of opportunity. She spoke softly, almost hesitantly, about wanting a fresh start, to earn enough to build a new life, to provide for her younger siblings. Something in me clicked when I met her. A primal urge, perhaps, to mend something else that was broken. To use our good fortune, our stability, to lift someone out of their bleak circumstances. I saw her not just as a vessel for our child, but as someone I could save. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, was more cautious, but even she was touched by Chloe's quiet vulnerability. We set her up in a beautiful, fully furnished apartment in a safe, quiet neighborhood in San Francisco, not far from us. The compensation was generous, more than she could have imagined, enough to genuinely change her life. We paid for everything: medical care, groceries, even a modest allowance for personal expenses. We wanted her to feel secure, cherished, respected. I truly believed we were giving her a chance, a pathway to dignity, and a future free from the shadow of her past. Every ultrasound, every checkup, felt like a step closer to the dream, a shared journey. The thought of a baby, our baby, growing inside Chloe, was an almost unbearable joy, a warmth spreading through the cold corners of our lives. I convinced myself that this arrangement wasn't just transactional, it was redemptive. For all of us. The first trimester passed with a gentle optimism. Chloe seemed to settle into her new life, sending us updates about her appointments, small pictures of her burgeoning belly. Sarah found an immediate, almost fierce, maternal connection to the growing life, poring over baby books, meticulously planning the nursery. For me, the connection was deeper, more complex. It wasn't just the hope of a child. It was the quiet satisfaction of seeing Chloe thrive, of knowing we were instrumental in that. I'd call her, checking in, not just on the baby, but on her well-being. She'd tell me about walks she took by the bay, about new recipes she tried in the kitchen of her sleek apartment. Her voice would often sound lighter than it had that first day we met, a subtle shift I attributed to her newfound security and perhaps the calm of pregnancy. We insisted she keep her appointments at the same facility where I worked, the best prenatal care money could buy, a level of attention she likely never imagined. I'd sometimes catch a glimpse of her in the hallways, a slight smile on her face as she rubbed her belly. It was in these moments that I felt an almost paternal bond forming, not just with our unborn child, but with Chloe herself. I remember thinking, this is what it means to be truly blessed, to be able to extend that blessing to others. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about building something good, something right, from the ground up. There were tiny, almost imperceptible flickers of doubt, moments I quickly rationalized away. Sometimes, her stories about her family in Bakersfield felt a little too vague, a little too rehearsed. There were times when she seemed to avoid eye contact, particularly when discussing financial matters, a fleeting shyness I put down to her upbringing. Sarah, ever the observant one, occasionally remarked on Chloe's quietude, saying things like, "She seems so detached sometimes, doesn't she?" But I'd quickly counter, reminding her of Chloe's difficult past, her likely exhaustion, the emotional toll of carrying a child that wasn't hers genetically. We were asking a lot of her, I reasoned. Detachment might even be a coping mechanism, a way for her to manage the emotional complexity of it all. I clung to my narrative, my belief that we were doing good, that we were creating a better future for everyone involved. The baby's kicks, strong and regular, were a constant reminder of the tangible reality growing within Chloe, a powerful counterpoint to any nagging doubts. The nursery, painted a soft sage green, stood ready, overflowing with tiny clothes and lovingly chosen toys. Our future, once a dim, distant star, was now a bright, undeniable beacon, all thanks to Chloe. As Chloe entered her third trimester, a subtle shift in her demeanor became more apparent, harder for me to ignore. The initial enthusiasm she'd shown for her new life in San Francisco seemed to wane. She started making more trips back to Bakersfield, citing family emergencies, a sick sibling, a cousin in trouble. Each time, she'd return a little more withdrawn, her eyes holding that haunted look I'd first encountered. I asked her once, gently, if everything was okay, if she needed anything. She just shrugged, saying, "It's just family stuff, Daniel. You wouldn't understand." It was a dismissive tone I hadn't heard from her before, a subtle barrier she'd erected. Sarah noticed it too. She mentioned that Chloe had been less responsive to texts, sometimes taking days to reply, and her once consistent updates about the baby became sporadic. One afternoon, Sarah confessed her growing unease. "I feel like she's pulling away," she said, her voice laced with worry. "We're supposed to be a team, aren't we? This is our child." I tried to soothe her, rationalizing it again, telling her it was normal for surrogates to create some emotional distance as the birth approached, a protective mechanism. But even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow. A cold knot started to form in my stomach, a premonition I desperately tried to ignore. The baby showers, planned with such love and excitement, Chloe attended with a polite, almost detached smile. She accepted gifts graciously but seemed uncomfortable with the attention, deflecting questions about her feelings or the upcoming birth with vague answers. She even started requesting larger sums for her expenses, claiming unexpected medical bills for her family or urgent repairs for her sibling's car. I complied without much question, driven by the overwhelming desire to keep the peace, to ensure our baby's safe arrival. It was only money, after all, and our child was priceless. But the requests felt different now, less about necessity and more about entitlement. The hum of the baby monitor, testing it for the nursery, sounded like a hollow echo in the quiet house, no longer a joyful promise but a fragile, ticking clock. Then, just days before her scheduled induction, Chloe vanished. We had a final doctor's appointment scheduled, a routine checkup to finalize birth plans. She didn't show. My calls went straight to voicemail. Sarah, her face pale, tried her number relentlessly, her voice trembling with each unanswered ring. A frantic energy seized me. We drove to her apartment, the beautiful place we'd provided, knocking on the door with growing urgency. No answer. The building manager confirmed she hadn't been seen for days. The apartment itself was disturbingly tidy, almost sterile. Her sparse belongings were gone. No note, no message, just an eerie emptiness where life and hope had once resided. The baby's ultrasound pictures, which she had proudly displayed on her fridge, were gone too. A suffocating dread settled over me, a chilling premonition that something far more sinister than a simple misunderstanding was at play. My mind, usually so precise and analytical, spun in a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. Where was she? Where was our baby? The silence of the empty apartment screamed louder than any alarm, confirming my worst fears. Sarah collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands, her sobs echoing the emptiness. The cold knot in my stomach tightened, turning into a solid block of ice. Every single rationalization, every dismissed doubt, every moment of misplaced trust crashed down on me in a wave of terrifying clarity. My savior complex had blinded me, making me vulnerable to a betrayal I hadn't dared to imagine. Panic was a suffocating cloak. We filed a missing persons report, but the police, accustomed to runaways and disputes, were initially slow to grasp the gravity of our situation. "She's an adult, Mr. Evans," they'd said, "and technically, the baby isn't legally yours yet." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Not legally yours yet. That was the crux of it, the horrifying loophole. My surgical precision, my ability to fix complex problems, felt utterly useless in the face of this terrifying ambiguity. Sarah was a ghost, wandering through our home, clutching a tiny onesie, her eyes wide with unshed tears. I couldn't just wait. I remembered Chloe's vague stories about Bakersfield, her evasiveness about her past. It was a shot in the dark, a desperate impulse. I called in every favor, leveraged every connection, until I got a lead, a grainy photo from a surveillance camera near a bus station, showing Chloe, heavily pregnant, with a man I didn't recognize, heading south. Bakersfield. As a long shot, but it was all I had. I drove through the night, the highway a blur, my mind replaying every interaction with Chloe, every fleeting moment of doubt I had so conveniently dismissed. The engine's hum was the only sound in the car, a low thrum against the frantic beat of my heart. The Bakersfield I drove into was a far cry from the vibrant, manicured streets of San Francisco. It was harsh, sun-baked, and smelled of dust and exhaust. I spent a day tracking down any flicker of information, speaking to people who barely acknowledged my presence, following the faint scent of a trail. It led me to the seedier side of town, to a motel called the Oasis Inn, a cruel irony. The neon sign flickered erratically, casting an ominous glow on the peeling paint of the building. My stomach churned with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. And then I saw her. Her face was haggard, her pregnant belly unmistakable, but her eyes held a hard glint I'd never seen before. She wasn't alone. The man with her was burly, his arms covered in tattoos, his eyes sharp and calculating. I recognized him instantly from the police report I discreetly obtained. Marco, her ex-boyfriend, a known drug dealer with a rap sheet as long as my arm. They were arguing, their voices hushed but strained, from inside a dingy motel room, the door slightly ajar. I stood there, frozen, hidden in the shadows, listening. The words that tumbled out of their mouths weren't the cries of someone in distress, but a cold, calculating exchange. I heard Marco's low growl. "They're loaded, Chloe. Don't blow this. We ask for another $500,000, or you walk away with the kid. They'll pay anything." Chloe's response was chillingly calm. "I told you they're soft. Especially Daniel. He thinks he's saving me." The air in my lungs turned to ice. He thinks he's saving me. My compassion, my desire to help, had been a weapon in her hands. She described our wealth, our desperation, the ease with which she had manipulated my paternal instinct. The plan, laid bare in their casual conversation, was to extort more money, threatening to disappear with the baby, or worse, claim parental rights, knowing full well the legal battle would bleed us dry. The revelation was a physical blow, a brutal shattering of every belief I held. My vision blurred, the dingy motel room swirling around me. Chloe had never intended to give us our baby. This wasn't about a fresh start. It was a kidnapping plot, orchestrated by a predator and executed by the woman I had tried so desperately to uplift. My world, built on hope and trust, imploded into a million fragments. The scene at the motel, the chilling words I overheard, detonated my world. Every memory of Chloe, every gesture of kindness, every moment of feigned vulnerability became tainted, a poisoned chalice. My initial paralysis gave way to a cold, burning rage. But before I could do something impulsive, something that might jeopardize our child, I forced myself to retreat, to think like the surgeon I was, precise, strategic. I called the police immediately, giving them the exact location, the names, the overheard conversation. My voice was steady, even as my hands trembled, adrenaline surging through me. It was no longer about saving Chloe. It was about saving my child. The ensuing legal storm was brutal. Chloe and Marco were arrested that night, not just for attempted extortion and fraud, but Chloe also faced charges related to drug possession found in the motel room, and horrifyingly, child endangerment. The legal battle that followed dragged on for months, a public and emotionally draining spectacle. Sarah and I were thrust into the unforgiving glare of the media, our deepest vulnerability exposed. We sat through endless depositions, recounted our story countless times, each repetition peeling back another layer of the wound. Chloe's lawyers tried to paint us as exploitative, wealthy parents attempting to buy a child, twisting her narrative into one of desperation, not malice. It was a grotesque distortion of the truth, but it struck a chord with some, adding to our humiliation. The weight of it all was crushing. I would often sit in my study, the nursery next door standing ready but empty, a painful reminder of what we were fighting for. I'd stare at the baby photos on my phone, images of ultrasound scans, proof of a life we desperately wanted, now held hostage by a cruel deception. The legal bills mounted, the stress etched deep lines on Sarah's face and mine. We were fighting not just for our child, but for the very essence of our dream. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the gavel fell. The judge, seeing through Chloe's fabricated narratives and Marco's obvious manipulation, ruled in our favor. We were granted full custody of our child, a baby girl we would name Alara. The relief was immense, a tidal wave that washed over us, but it was mixed with an overwhelming exhaustion. Chloe and Marco were convicted, sentenced to significant prison time. Justice, of a sort, had been served. The day we brought Alara home was a blur of emotions. She was small, perfect, her tiny hands grasping my finger with surprising strength. Holding her, feeling her warm weight against my chest, the trauma of the past months began to recede, replaced by an incandescent love. Yet, the scars of betrayal were deep. I looked at this innocent life, this miracle, and knew the fight had been worth it, but the cost, the profound shattering of my trust, would linger. The first few years were a tapestry woven with exquisite joy and lingering shadows. Alara was everything we had ever dreamed of and more. Her laughter filled our home. Her tiny discoveries filled our days with wonder. Parenthood, I discovered, was a wild, unconditional love that reshaped my entire being. But the betrayal had left a jagged wound. Trust became a fragile, almost unattainable thing. I found myself scrutinizing intentions, questioning motives, my old openness replaced by a guarded skepticism. It bled into my relationships, even, at times, with Sarah, as I wrestled with the specter of deception. I spent countless sleepless nights dissecting it all, trying to understand how I, a man who prided himself on his ability to assess and predict, had been so utterly blind. I realized then that my desire to save Chloe hadn't been pure altruism. It was rooted in my own need to fix, to control, to impose my narrative of success on someone else's life. I had conflated compassion with a misguided sense of rescue, and that hubris had almost cost us everything. This painful realization became the foundation of something new. I knew I couldn't change what happened, but I could prevent it from happening to others. I channeled my pain, my anger, and my lessons into action. Sarah, equally scarred but just as determined, joined me. We started a foundation, Alara's Hope, dedicated to supporting ethical surrogacy practices, providing comprehensive psychological screening for both intended parents and surrogates, and offering counseling for those who, like us, navigated the treacherous waters of third-party reproduction. We advocated for stronger legal protections, for clearer guidelines, for a system built on transparency and genuine empathy, not on the naive belief that everyone shared the same intentions. Years later, Alara is a vibrant, inquisitive child, completely oblivious to the dramatic, heartbreaking story of her arrival. We have given her a life filled with love, security, and unwavering devotion. My trust issues have softened, not vanished, but I've learned to distinguish between healthy caution and debilitating cynicism. I still practice surgery, still fix broken hearts, but now, my work with the foundation feels equally vital, a different kind of healing. The joy of fatherhood is profound, a pure, unadulterated force in my life. The bitter truth remains. Our family was forged through immense pain and betrayal. But from that crucible, we emerged, broken yet stronger, forever changed, but ultimately whole. The scar tissue of that ordeal is a permanent reminder, a quiet whisper of what was lost, but also a testament to the enduring power of unconditional love and the enduring resilience of the human spirit.